Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Hey, how's everybody doing out there? It's your boy Kelvin. As you guys know, I do my broadcast in English, but anybody who's been watching my stuff, even some of the newcomers, probably about 90%, if not 95% of my subscribers from around the world are actually coming from the Philippines. So I do start to speak Tagalog, but I don't want people thinking that the broadcast is not in English, so I don't start with that. But to all my people in the Philippines, magandang umaga, kamusta na, aking magkakaibigan, Masaya akong mukita kang muli. Appreciate you guys coming by, stopping by my video, giving me these suggestions. I did a poll a couple of days ago, and they asked specifically for some Wesley So. And so I went ahead and did Wesley So versus Rogelio Antonio Jr. back from 2009. And then I had another person that asked me for a Roderick Nava. And so, automatically, because Roderick, as you guys know, everybody pretty much who subscribed to me watches Roderick Nava as well. It's a pretty big YouTuber. I had to go on his page to make sure that I wasn't stepping on his toes and that I didn't pull a game from his library that he had already done. Because I want to be respectful of other YouTubers and everything. So I'm almost positive that I did not pull a game that he has already done. I saw two different games, I believe, between him and Rogelio Antonio Jr. Both of those games he played white and Rogelio played black. So this was the only game that I did not see on his page at all. So anyway, it is from the 2012 Grand Final for the Philippines. And I'm not completely sure what that tournament really is, but it had pretty much people from Roderick Nava was actually the lowest rated. He was 2397. They had all the way up to 2600. They actually had a guy in it that played. I believe he played for the University of Texas at Dallas, which is a really huge chess school down in Texas. So anyway, if you guys are ready, this one has a really good thematic end game that I wanted to show you guys and make you guys familiar with if you're not. So if you're ready to go, let's go ahead and jump in and see what we have. Let me get that. Let me click the screen. All right, so we have E4, we got C6, and we have C3. So we have the Sicilian Alapin variation. And so basically what this is doing is it's trying to achieve like the ideal pawn center, kind of like the similar idea that the Sicilian is trying to do. They're trying to give up one of their wing pawns for a white central pawn to kind of disrupt their ideal, pawn center. And of course the Sicilian scores very well against E4. So much so that there are some players who've actually given up playing E4 altogether so they don't have to deal with it. And the Scandinavian is kind of annoying to some people too. Anyway, rolling on. Usually in this position, like this one right before, you'll see like a knight to F3. This is like almost always what's going to come. This is the number one played move. And then the second played move is going to be knight to C3. Just going for like simple development, stuff like that, not committing, any trades at all in the middle. But C3 is the third most played. So it's a pretty popular line. Probably, I don't know, 15, 20,000 games or something played in it. So it's definitely up there. So like I said, run through these moves real quick. So we have D5, pawn takes D5, queen takes D5. We have D4, knight coming into C6. We have knight to F3. We have pawn taking D4, pawn taking D4. We have E5. We have knight to C3, bishop to B4, and we have bishop to D2. Now it looks kind of crazy because let me see. Nava is attacking, the heck out of Rogelio. Pretty much every single move that you see Nava make is attacking, like just literally not giving him a chance to breathe, right? But even though it looks really crazy, white does hold a slight edge in this position, and it's pretty sharp, as a lot of Sicilians can be. So we see bishop takes C3. Bishop takes C3. We see E4, knight to E5. We see knight taking E5. We see pawn taking E5. And then we see knight to E7. And something I wanted to point out to you guys, something that you guys hear me say quite a bit, is not going into automatic trades. So I want you to be paying very close attention to this actual position here and where black's pieces are with respect to white's pieces. As you can see, right now, black is ready to castle, and they just need to develop their bishop, and they're going to have their rooks connected. And then right now, white has to develop their queen. They have to develop their bishop, and they have to castle to get their rooks fully connected, right? So both sides are pretty much kind of doing fairly equally, right? But to back up real quick, to show you what would happen, because I mean, I noticed there are like some players that do just kind of trade whenever it's available. And sometimes you're not really familiar with like what type of position that will put you in. So let's say, comparing to the position that we just saw a second ago, if we were to just go into an automatic trade for white, because maybe you don't like the tension between, you know, the queens. Let's say that, you know, queen taking d1 was played. And then we would have a rook taking d1. As you can see, the position is much worse for black in this position than it is for white. So, you know, you would have to probably develop the knight here. And then so you'd have 1, you know, 2 after castles, and 3 moves to get the rook connected. And black only has developing their bishop and castling. So in essence, white is kind of ahead a move almost, right? So it's considerably different than what we were in before. And as, of course, Roderick Nava knows, you know, you always want to try to develop as much as possible. So the knight coming here would be perfect, because if white did do the same thing and they went ahead and just took here, you'd be taken back with the knight. And now you have some problems because this knight is attacking this bishop here. You know, so you're probably going to be going in something like bishop to b5 with check. And actually, as crazy as it looks, the king can actually just step down to e7 and you're all good to go. You know, and the rook is about to be coming out. You still have the problem with the bishop being attacked and stuff like that. So, you know, you have to be very careful when you're trading stuff. So, like I said, we had knight to e7. We have queen to a4. We have bishop to d7. We have queen to a3, you know, trying to make it hard for black to castle because, you know, this knight is kind of hanging. So we have queen to e6, protecting the knight. Rook to d1. We have castles by black. We have bishop to e2 for white. We have bishop to c6 for black. And then we have queen to d6. Trying to press the issue because, you know, this queen is the only thing holding the knight together. Just, you know, offering a trade of queens. And what I want you to go ahead and do right now, if you want to go ahead and stop the video, this is actually where the novelty of the game comes up. So I want to see if you can possibly guess the novelty of the position. And there's a nice little concept. It's not fully present in this position, but it does have you know, some you know, it's kind of how do I want to say that? It's kind of instructional, like, you know, kind of to visualize what I'm about to show you. So like I said, if you want to stop it and see if you can guess the move, go ahead and do so. Okay, cool. So the novelty of the game is actually knight to d5. So if you guess knight to d5, you probably kind of have a mind to think about the disconnection of pieces. This is something I talked about in a previous video. But even though the queen is protected by this pawn here, so the queen isn't hanging, what the knight is doing is successfully, not only is it developing like with a tempo on the bishop, like I was saying earlier, but it is disconnecting the queen and the rook. And so it's going to make it a lot easier to be swinging a rook over type deal. You know, you're going to be putting a lot of pressure on this queen and stuff like that, and just the central position that white has. So it's a nice, cute little move. And so that is the novelty of the game. There were 4 games that were total played in this position that we had before. Knight to d5 was a Nava novelty, which is an interesting, I guess, an interesting play on words, a Nava novelty. Anyway, so we do see bishop to c4, trying to get rid of the pesky knight in the middle, because it is pretty beautiful. So we see rook f to d8, like I said, you know, disconnecting the rook and the queen. It's making it a lot easier to move a rook over. So we see queen takes e6, pawn takes e6. We have castles by white. We have king to f7. We have bishop to d2. And so something I mentioned in a previous video, whenever you are retreating your bishop to somewhere, you want to retreat it in such a way to where you're going to be dominating, you know, because when you're playing bishops to knights, you want to be dominating, you know, dominating this knight. So now this knight really doesn't have anywhere to go to try to, you know, infiltrate into the position that you have. So we see, get that off there. So we see knight to b6, attacking the bishop. Ideally, black would want to try to trade off one of the bishops because as the position does open, the bishops are going to be better than the knights. So we see bishop back to b3. We see bishop to a4. So you're really forcing the issue now, you know, getting one of these pairs of bishop off, because, you know, you're not going to be giving up the rook. So you kind of have to go into a trade here. So after f3, we see e3, bishop takes e3, bishop takes b3, and then we see pawn takes b3. And it could be somewhat significant that you do have a damaged structure here. It's going to be a little easier for the knight to kind of hop around and try to pick off. So the rook takes d1, rook takes d1. We see knight to d5. And like I said, when you're thinking of retreating, I mean, because, you know, you could have went back here to f2, you know, which probably wouldn't have been too horrible. But, you know, backing up to here is still maintaining that control of this knight. So we see bishop to d2. And like I said, rook to c8. So we have rook to c1. There probably isn't much better to do in a position than to trade, because, you know, you can't allow this rook to infiltrate your position. So this is the best thing that you can do. So after the rook takes on c1, we see bishop takes c1. We see knight to b4. We have bishop to e3. We have knight to d3. You know, not really successfully being able to hold on to the pawn. Because you're going to be seeing the knight coming down and snapping this one off. So we just went ahead and gave it up. So bishop takes a7, knight takes e5. We see bishop to d4. We see knight to c6, bishop to c3. As you see, like I said, you see the pattern. So every time Rogelio Antonio, anytime he you know, has to retreat his bishop after it's attacked, you know, he's retreating it in such a way where he can still try to dominate this knight. Because when you're getting into an endgame with different minor pieces, it's all about trying to dominate the other person's minor piece with your minor piece. Whether it's a knight, you know, maybe having the structure more locked so the bishop is ineffective, or trying to reduce the amount of movement that the knight has when you have a bishop. So we see pawn to e5. We got king to f2. King to e6. We have king to e3. So as you can see, the knight and the bishop have kind of gotten their little place that they want to be at, and so it's time to get the kings in there. So we see knight to d8. Also, something that was possible, probably a little bit more active, was going to be king to d5, just further centraling your king. So like I said, we did have knight to d8. So after f4, pawn takes f4, we have king takes f4. And as you can see, the position has started to get probably about a pawn's worth advantage, even though you see a physical pawn. You know, you got about a pawn's worth of advantage here because this bishop does have a lot of scope now. So white has been able to open the position up. And so this knight is going to kind of have a hard time because, you know, anytime you have a knight in an endgame and you have pawns on separate sides of the board, it's really hard for the knight to protect both of those sides of the board. And it's much easier for a bishop to do that. So as you can see, the position is slightly favoring white here. So we have g6, trying to get your pawns off of the dark squares. So as you can see, you know, Nava has been able to put his pawns on the dark square or the light squares, so they're not really as effectively attacked by the pawn. And so after king to e4, we see knight coming back to c6. We have h3. And so as you can see, what white is trying to do is white is trying to put their pawns on, you know, opposite colored squares than their bishop. So their bishop has complete movability, you know, wherever he wants to go. So we have h5. Bishop comes down to d2. We see king to d6, bishop to e3. We see king to e6. We see bishop to f4. We see knight to a5. And we see Rogelio just giving up the pawn. There's not really a good way to hold on to it. So he's trying to look for his own activity, trying to get up to get that pawn. So after knight takes b3, we see king to c4. After knight to a5 we check, we see king to b5. And then after knight coming back to c6, we see king to b6. So as you can see, he didn't really give up a pawn. He's getting his pawn back. You know, he's just looking for some activity. So knight comes to b4. Bishop comes down to d2. We see knight to d3. We see b4. And as you can see, you know, white is about to win a pawn and they're actually up a pawn. So, you know, they've been able to, you know, push their advantage a little bit further through. So we see g5. The pawn comes to b5. Now it's protected by the king. So this bishop has the ability to grab this pawn now. And so after g4, the king just goes ahead and takes on b7. Because you're not worried about the trades here because that's just going to, you know, lock the pawns over here, which does end up happening. So after king to d7, we see bishop to e3, pawn takes h3, pawn takes h3. We see e5, we see king to a8, and as you can see, king to a8 is perfect because it's protecting this queening square. I mean, this was possible as well, But, you know, it's just a little bit more accurate going the way he did, because then you don't have to worry about the king coming here. You would if you were, you know, coming over here. Less so, but I mean, just anyway, it's a little bit more accurate. So king coming to A8, knight coming to C4. We see B6. Now you have a critical decision you make here. I mean, as you guys are seeing, you're going to have to give up the knight for this pawn, because this pawn is going to queen in 2 moves. So you can either do it immediately and get you into that type of situation where the bishop takes, or you can try to put it off for 1 more move after knight to D6, you know, coming to B7, and then it will be trading off here. But backing up here, forgot to say that this was the position right here where Roderick Nava actually does resign the game. And I'll be showing you exactly why. And like I said before, this is why the concept, the in-game concept, comes into play. Because there's a little subtle difference in certain positions when you get into the end game. So like I said, after B6 is pushed, Naba, you know, being knowledgeable enough about the end game and knowing that he's playing a GM, he said, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and just throw the towel in, because I can kind of visualize what's gonna happen. This is a very theoretical end game that they've gotten into. So just to show you, just to kind of run through what I did, was I kind of did like a quick path to showing you the end game concept that I'm trying to show you. And basically, I'm not sure any of you guys have heard of the wrong rook pawn. You know, so basically just getting into the situation. So after knight to D6, B7, knight takes B7 and king takes B7, right? What you have here is, if you guys are familiar with like reading through like maybe a beginner, intermediate, in-game chess book, or something like that, you guys will have probably come across the concept of wrong rook pawn or right rook pawn. So basically what you have right here on the screen is you have a situation where you have the right colored rook pawn. And the reason I'm saying that is because this bishop is a dark bishop, and the queening square for this rook pawn is on this square. So that means that I'll show you guys the 2 little separate ending variations as to why that's significant and why it makes a difference that it's not the wrong rook pawn. Because if you switch it over and moving this, if you were to move this rook over here to this square, it would be the wrong rook pawn, because this king can set up camp if it can get there in this, you know, in this corner here, and can literally just shift back and forth, and it can just be a draw. So even though you have way more material than black does, it would be a theoretical draw, but this is a theoretical win. So going into like the quickest variation I could find, we see king to E8, we see king to C6, king to F8, king to D6, king to G8, king to E6, king to H8, king to F6, king to G8, king to G6, king to H8. We see king taking H5, king back to G8. We have king to G6. We have king to H8. Okay, so like I said, you have the king that's in the black corner, and you have this pawn that wants to queen on that square, and you have the right bishop to be able to kick the king away. So just to show you 2 different variations of what that might look like, it's either you're forcing the queening of the pawn, or you're just delivering checkmate. So to run through the first variation, we see H4, the king coming to G8, H5, the king coming to H8. We see H6, the king coming to G8. We see bishop to D4, and this would be forcing the king, because now the king doesn't have the ability to go back to that square, so we're forcing the promotion of the pawn. After king coming to F8, we see H7, the king coming over to E8, and then we would see the pawn coming to H8. That's queening. So that's one variation. Also, you have after king to H8, you have a way to basically checkmate in the corner. So you have bishop to G5, the king would come over to G8, and then bishop to E7 cuts the king off and forces the king back into the corner square. And then you basically just march the pawn up, and the king goes back and forth. And then after H6, H7, it would force the king over to H8, only move, and then you'd be delivering checkmate with the bishop on F6. So these are the 2 things that Nava did, you know, calculate in his mind. And like I said, because they're theoretical endgames, you know, most master level players, intermediate players are going to be familiar with these concepts. But, you know, of course, in a game of like amateurs or maybe intermediate players, maybe the players might kind of play it out, because not everybody is familiar with how to win these types of theoretical endgames. But a little bit longer video than I anticipated, but I wanted to make sure that I showed you guys the reason why, you know, Nava resigned, because it is not completely obvious when we get to, so we get 53. When we get to the move 53, it's not completely obvious in this position why Roderick Nava would have resigned the game. But Maraming Salamat Kaibagan, King Bagat Kaibagan, Messiah Messiah Akong Makita Kang Muli. Appreciate you guys stopping by. Ingat lagi, mabuhay, and I will see you guys next time. Appreciate it.